Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today about gambling in the military. Our host for today will be Vin Bickler, who's worked at the council since August of last year. The two of us joined on the same day, so he asked me to run things, make sure everyone's in here and gets credit for being here and is properly muted. As I mentioned to some people who were here early, if you do have questions, put them in the chat box. But we are very fortunate to have a special guest on the webinar today, and that's Dr. Heather Chapman. We're very excited to have her here for this event. She's the director of the Problem Gambling Treatment Program at the Cleveland VA Medical Center, and a leader in the field and an excellent speaker. And we expect nothing less today, Dr. Chapman. So we're very happy you're here, and I'll let you and Vin take it from this point.
Thank you, Phil. It is my pleasure and my honor, frankly, to have Dr. Chapman participate in Problem Gambling Awareness Month in this webinar sponsored by the Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey. Dr. Chapman's schedule is jam-packed year-round, and for her to take the time to be with us is an honor. And she and I go way back, actually, in the context of one of the pioneers of problem gambling research and VA program development, Dr. Robert Custer, who in the 70s wrote a relevant book on problem gambling, which is still available and most pertinent today. I had the pleasure and the honor of being in one of his studies in the 70s as a recovering problem gambler, been associated with Gamblers Anonymous since 1976. And during that time, early on, I was introduced to Dr. Custer and actually was involved with a documentary that was produced here in New Jersey by a production company in Trenton, which featured Arnie W. and his wife. And I acted as a consultant for that documentary, and Dr. Custer was one of the featured clinicians who was a part of that documentary. And he passed the baton on to running the program, the inpatient program at Cleveland VA Medical Center, to our guest today, who is carrying on the research and the clinical treatment inpatient there at the Cleveland Medical Center. And the program, in terms of being involved with veterans, has always been very, very dear to me. I lost my brother at 25 who was serving in the Army when I was 18 years of age. In 2008, my youngest son enlisted in the U.S. Army. He served admirably and did 2 deployments to Afghanistan. And it was when he was first deployed to Afghanistan that I contacted the VA hospital here in New Jersey in East Orange and was connected with Dr. Gates, who runs the program for outpatient, inpatient drug and alcohol patients at East Orange and now Alliance Hospital here in New Jersey. I wanted to do something to help my son, but couldn't directly. But with my involvement in the Gamblers Anonymous program, it was natural for me to try and do something at that hospital. And since 2009, I've been spending most Monday evenings until recently, where Phil has filled the void where I'm working full time, and it's a distance to get up to Lions. But interacting with the veterans at first East Orange and now at Lions, it is very, very apparent that many of the addicted patients at that hospital or those hospitals have not just a problem with their drinking and drugging, but are cross-addicted. And many times speaking to the various patients there, more than 50% of them, when asked to raise their hand if they think they may have had or have a gambling problem. It is so common for drug addicts and alcoholics to also develop a problem with gambling. And that involvement in terms of active duty personnel and veterans is the focus of this webinar today. And Dr. Chapman, knowing full well the background of people who are in the military, who, like my son, enlisted on a voluntary basis, or our military is all volunteer. And my Jeff's motivation was to protect his family and his country, the height of the Afghanistan war and the concomitant problems in the Middle East. Unlike, or like most of the people who do volunteer, they are highly motivated people who have a desire to defend their family and country. They're highly motivated to be a part of something that is exciting, risk-taking, fearless. They're strong, loyal people, and they're comfortable with a discipline-oriented career and lifestyle. Unfortunately, that lifestyle in the military lends itself to addictive behavior and problems and issues with gambling because of that lifestyle. The swings in great activity and slow times, high stress all of the time, sleep deprivation, a difficult lifestyle. There's so much about military life, and then too as veterans, where the people who are associated with the military are prone to issues with addiction. One of the issues that was very, very significant, I know with my son, and we had very brief contact like this. Well, it was called FaceTime then, where he had a computer, even out in the mountains of Afghanistan. Once every 2 weeks, we would get to FaceTime. Very, very crude situation in terms of the reception, but we were able to connect. And that separation from family and friends and the normal routine of life is a real issue with people in the military. And I'd like to formally introduce Dr. Chapman, ask her to give the folks here some of her background and discuss with us initially the history, the background of the VA helping veterans, and now, as you shared with me last week, which I was so happy to hear, that active duty personnel can get help at the VA hospitals. Dr. Chapman, welcome and thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, I've been at the VA for quite a while. I'm a daughter of a Korean War veteran, private, first class, but he was in intelligence. They actually froze the ranks. So even though he was acting in a higher capacity, he was frozen that rank. He never, so I grew up with a guy that was in a combat situation that never talked about it. And with a mother, I grew up actually partway in Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut, near Providence, actually. And then we moved to Ohio, Northeast Ohio, and my mom got a job. She was a nurse. She got a job at the VA. And I was drawn to it from that point. And I ended up volunteering at the VA. And one of the things that I did as a volunteer is I did some research studies. And one of the research studies had, as part of their group of people that we were researching, was the folks that were in the gambling program. And so that was my first entree into this. It was the late 80s. And it was an interesting group. And I just never thought about this field, thought about these things. And I remember walking down the hallway with a guy who was actually from New Jersey. He kind of hopped back and forth between New Jersey and New York. And I'm bringing him to the lab to do some testing or something that I had to do. And I said, well, why are you here in Cleveland? It didn't make sense to me because usually VAs are local hospitals taking care of local veterans. And he said, well, I'm here for this program. And I said, oh, well, what do you do otherwise? What do you do in your home? And he goes, I'm a bookmaker. And I said, oh, wow. And my answer was just demonstrated how much I didn't know. And I said, that's really cool. And I thought he was making books, like paper and binding them. And I had no clue anything at that point. And I was, again, brought into this field doing actually personality inventories with folks that were in the gambling program and comparing them to other folks in some of the other programs. And I really grew to be fascinated from the get-go. Did my internship and so forth, and have pretty much been there since. One of the things that I think is the most important piece of the Cleveland VA, the Brecksville campus of the Cleveland VA, is Dr. Custer, and that he listened, and who he listened to. So the reason why the program was created is because of, and I love this part of the story, is Gamblers Anonymous. So members of Gamblers Anonymous came to Dr. Custer and said, we can deal with certain things, but we've got people here that are talking about taking their lives. We have people here that are considering committing crimes. We have people here whose lives, whose families are falling apart. We need help. You have treatment for drugs, you have treatment for alcohol. Can you do this? Can you put together a treatment program for people like us? And of course, back then, the majority of people had been in the service. So these guys, these GA members, had been in the service. So they came in that, again, it was a draft service. And as you know, if you look at your own family, the majority of the family in the older generations, for lack of a better word, but before, since before Vietnam and earlier, people went into the service. It was part of being a United States citizen. It was just part of what happened. And so I think that Dr. Custer heard that and understood that and appreciated that and said, yeah, why not? The problem was it wasn't a diagnosis. It was written here and there, there's references to gambling in the Bible. It is well known that gambling existed before substance use disorders, before substance use issues, before substance use, before wine and drugs and so forth. Gambling existed before that. So it's an important element of the program, that this was really the first program ever, not VA or otherwise. And it was a time of collaboration, of coming together, which I think is something that has really differentiated gambling from any other of the issues I see out there, that there's really a collaboration, that people are at the same table, much more so than you see in the drug and alcohol communities. As far as treatment providers. I mean, I know my GA members locally. I know them nationally. I mean, they call me. They call me in my office, the local program, and ask me how it's going and what we're doing and how they can help. They're very much part of the program. So in that, I'm very appreciative of that, and I think it actually makes for a richer program, richer experience for everybody. You did mention one other thing that I'll elaborate on. Yeah, we're a different. It's a different world right now. We have all volunteer. And the reasons why people are volunteering are very different than they were previously. I think if there was volunteering right now for the service, I think a whole bunch of people would go in right now for what's going on. Because I know the people that I work with, I know this group, to kind of figure out and right the wrongs and be part of the solution, I think is a huge piece of what we see. But that takes a certain character, it takes a certain person, it takes someone that's a little bit more willing to take a risk to jump in there, which is obviously one of the risk factors for gambling. There are other reasons why people join the service as well, sometimes to get away from home, you know, to create a better life, and so forth. But this whole piece of this sensation seeking, I want to jump in there and do something, really is one of the hallmark highlighted issues that will make someone more vulnerable to gambling, because it's somebody that has less of a risk adversity. They're more likely to just sort of jump in there and do something. So again, it's a great honor to continue the tradition my mother started working in the VA. And it's really the thing that keeps me there are the veterans in the program, the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis. It's the most courageous, amazing group of people I can ever imagine having in my life, without a doubt. You're muted, Ben. I don't think he knows he's muted.
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Can you share with us what's happening in the military today with new recruits and those who are on active duty in terms of screening, where there's always been the screening and obviously a drug test, a urine test, blood test does check off whether a person is actively high or suffering from alcohol abuse, but our addiction is hidden. We can mask it. So is the military addressing in 2022 screening for gambling issues with new recruits and active duty?
Yes, so the screening processes have changed pretty significantly over the years. It was part of the general process in the early 2000s, actually, and through the 90s including. And then it sort of dropped off and it became not part of the required screen. I do think people were screened, but it was very individualized depending on the doc or the group that you were seeing. Unfortunately, I think that's true for a lot of our society as well. It just depends on who you see, whether you're going to be screened or not, unless you have an institution that requires it. So there has been movement in making that a requirement again. There's been an act to create a program or a requirement for screening on an ongoing basis. There are some folks that I see that were screened throughout their time, and there are folks that I've had that were not ever screened. That unfortunately is true too with people who are seeing VA or civilian providers, that drug and alcohol screening has been really consistent. However, gambling screening has been really inconsistent. I think it's increasing and becoming more of a focus, but it's still where the work is, getting us to understand the screening. The other problem with the screening is the risk that it has. So some people, I actually just talked to someone the other day who talked about screening, and he said, if I was going to be screened, because he gambled in the military and he gambled outside the military, that's why I know him. And he's doing quite well right now. He's been away from gambling for a while. He had to fall down a few times pretty hard for it to for him to make some good I would say self-binding strategies to kind of keep him away from gambling. But he said, if I was asked, or when I was asked those questions, I would always say no, because I didn't want to lose my clearance. So there is a real fear for folks in the service to share. They really are, I think, trying to work on these issues. It's the same is true for folks who have PTSD. There's a real fear that if I demonstrate the problems that I'm going to be having, that I'll be discharged from the service for one reason or another. And so there is this kind of internal mechanism of people's hiding of these issues. So the more that, the more they're seeing, particularly, honestly, the OEF Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, the Afghanistan and Iraqi wars, that they've really demonstrated some of the needs that the VA and the DoD have to pay attention to in order to meet the needs of our troops and our veterans. And part of that is screening, having the conversation, which is National Council for Problem Gambling has been talking about that for a while, and how to have that conversation. One of the problems with screens is they do work really well if someone wants to be screened. If someone doesn't want it to be screened, you can't find gambling addiction in a urine drug screen or a blood screen or a hair test. It is completely out of either their or a family member's participation in a screening process, in an interview. I think making it such that it's a safer thing to talk about is one thing. And then also really thinking about the screening questions and what they are. I don't think a good screening question is, have you lied about your gambling to anyone? People are gonna, have you hidden it? Do you tend to hide it from other people? Or hide it from yourself, hide how much you win or lose? But even more so than that, the question of, do you gamble? How do you, really thinking about, and this is from some of Lori Rugel's work, what do you do with your time? How do you spend your time? What's your recreation look like? And have you ever go to that casino down the street? Ever play the lottery? Threaded into a conversation of the stuff that people do. I think that's what is an easier path to discussing it, so that it doesn't raise sort of an internal rejection of what you're going to be coming forth with. And that's something we really pay attention to.
Well, what you're describing in terms of the behavior pattern is so common amongst those of us who are problem gamblers. In the throes of my addiction, I had two different very significant people in my life say to me, if Vinny's lips are moving, he's lying. And that lying component, that horrendous character defect, that I don't think anything can be said about a person worse than if his lips are moving, he's lying. And two different very, very important people in my life said that. And to this day, I carry that shame. And frankly, it has become a motivator to not go back to the vet, because I don't want to be characterized that way, in such a despicable way.
Right.
The screening, of course, the first words out of our mouths as problem gamblers is we lie.
Right.
We're taught in program, count to 10 before you respond to any significant question, because the first thought, the first words out of your mouth as a problem gambler in action is a lie. So yes, the screening, obviously weaving it into a conversation about recreational activity.
Right.
And I hope there are.
You'll lie about the lie.
Exactly. And we forget. We tell so many, we don't remember
You forget
who we
what
lied
even,
to.
right. And I think that lies, I find lying very interesting. I find that one of the most interesting criteria. I would say it's the most damaging criteria. It's the most damaging to who someone is and what have I become and what's happened to me, or a family member, what's happened to you? That kind of moment. And the thing about lies is humans are one of the most skilled species when it comes to lying. We're very skilled at lying, and it's due to it's a honed skill, and it's really a survival skill. And when resources are scarce, you need to know how to lie. You need to know how to lie to get your resources, and resources aren't scarce right now. But when you're triggered by a situation like gambling and you're feeling in a corner, that kind of natural capacity for lying will pop up. The capacity for lying will pop up naturally. It'll just sort of come up. And I do think it's extremely dangerous. And, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous talks about rigorous honesty. And I think rigorous honesty is a really important aspect of this. And I think, you know, one of the things that's really fascinating about lying and coming clean with your lies is and the shame associated with that. There's pro-social shame, and I think that, and that sounds weird, right? But there's something that happens when you get in a room with another person, or you see a podcast with another person, and you hear someone talk about their shameful behaviors, their difficult moments that they do, you know, pieces of a step 4 maybe. That stuff actually creates connection that is unlike anything else. Because I think gambling, more than any other, certainly more than of other substance use disorders, other addictions, those addictions, is one of, I'm the only one that's doing this. It feels very lonely because you don't hear a lot. The average person doesn't know, even some people don't even know that there's help. They don't even know what 1-800-GAMBLER is. Sometimes they're like, oh, I thought that's where you get your numbers. And so I think that once people see that, oh my gosh, there's someone like me, that does two things. One, it's a huge sense of relief, obviously. But the second thing it does is it actually changes the brain. It actually is an immediate healing, and it actually does some, you know, healthy dopaminergic activity, and actually increases activity in the frontal lobe, which is the whole part of the brain that helps us make good decisions. Now, when we have that plus someone that was in the service, it's like a double whammy, because it's like, oh, you get me. Like, so the people in the room, we understand each other because we've all been in the service. We speak the same language in that way, but we also understand each other because we're all struggling from gambling. So when we, you know, I have the honor to be part of a team that works on those two things together. Anytime that you can find some kind of common ground with people, and you can be in a group with people, it creates an incredible force for change, and hope, I would say, and creates a incredible source of hope for the potential for change, which is, you know, you can't get better than that.
Well, that transition from the lying that is so insidious and so it's constant when in action, that relief, the camaraderie of sitting in a room with a fellow problem gambler who is honest and listening to honest sharing is, as you just described, so healthy and it's such a relief from the pressure, because when in action, the pressure that a person is under, and in combat or in active duty, and even those who I encountered so often week after week at the VA hospitals here in New Jersey, when we would talk about cross addiction or the similarities between their problems drinking, their problems drugging, and in some instances, and it happened quite often, it was like a light bulb going off on the top of the head of one of the veterans in the conference room at the VA hospital. I never realized I do a lot of gambling, and I have, and it's really been a problem. I
Yeah.
have really hurt myself, and I didn't think I was. I
Right.
thought I was just a problem drunk. I was always ending up at the end of the card game, passing out, and I thought that was my problem. But I lost every dollar I sat down with time and time again. So, you know, the complicated relationships between the various addictions, um, it's so healthy that there are clinicians now we have in New Jersey that network with our council, where we're able to, when we talk to people on the 800 Gambler line, refer people, not just the gambler, but the loved ones, the family members, to seek out the appropriate counseling that's required to recover, along with attendance, as you alluded to, your involvement in the help from Gamblers Anonymous, that combination. And back to Dr. Custer, the first time I met him was 1978. And I sat in his office at the VA in Washington, D.C. And he said, you know, I'm a clinician. And he said, there are lots of MDs, there are lots of psychiatrists, psychologists that do wonderful things in counseling and helping people. But he said, a problem gambler needs a 12-step program, just like an alcoholic needs AA. There is something spiritual, there's something that's a miracle about that involvement, the addict with the addict supporting each other. And he said, there isn't a doctor on the face of the earth that is worth his weight in salt if he doesn't require his clients to also seek help in a 12-step program, because it's a miracle. Addicts help addicts, whether they're drunks, whether they're drug addicts or problem gamblers. What we understand in our heads, and I call people who are not addicts, and the guys in the rooms that I attend laugh at me, I call people that are not addicts earth people. And the wife, the mother, the best enablers, the biggest enablers on the face of the earth, they do everything possible to help the problem gambler or the drunk or the drug addict, but they don't understand what's going on inside of our heads. The pressure that we're under, the thought processes that are so distorted, that are so out of whack with mainstream reality, that dream world that we live in, the earth person, the mother, the wife, whoever it is that's trying to help the counselor that isn't an addict, that they just don't know what's confusing and what's mixed up, what's jumbled in our heads that make us. I can remember standing at Monmouth Racetrack in Oceanport, New Jersey, crowded or with 7, 8, 9,000 people in the crowd around me, and knowing full well at 25, 30 years of age, I'm doing the wrong thing. I don't belong here. This is insanity. This behavior is out of control. But you know what? My feet were in quicksand. I wouldn't move out of there. I stayed until the last race ended, till the last dollar was gone. And when I interact with those who are in service, the veterans at those VA hospitals, anecdotally, they would all say the exact same thing. When I got away from Camp Pendleton or Fort Pendleton and was able to go for the weekend to Vegas and spend every dollar of my paycheck, the monthly paycheck, at the roulette wheel or at the blackjack table or at slot machines, I was in heaven for one period of time. That weekend, away from the training, away from the pressure of the military, I was in heaven. And I know from my own son's experience, when he came back from Afghanistan, he said, Dad, the toughest thing was readjusting to reality.
Right. And, there's a lot of work on dopamine and gambling. There is some work on dopamine and PTSD and dopamine and mental health issues. And, dopamine is a it's a neurotransmitter of rush, of high, but it's also a neurotransmitter of motivation, it's like a push. It's a motivation, it's a neurotransmitter of movement toward something. And it used to be a movement towards something for survival. So we all have dopaminergic activity, everybody does. When you go through experience, and it's very specifically what you mentioned with your son and what I see in my work with the veterans, is you see people that have gone through pretty extreme experiences, or very extreme experiences, which does have implications on the dopaminergic system. And we do know that when you push dopamine through a system, when you have a heavy overloading of dopamine, it's like our basements in the sump pump. So the sump pump is there to kind of pull the water out if it starts filling up with which some of us have had that experience. It's a horrible experience. So thank God for the sump pump to regulate this. What the brain does though, and this is the problem, the brain will say, oh my gosh, there's all of this dopamine going on. We need to like pull it back. So it pulls it back. So when you get a really high amount of dopamine, then you get a high amount of rebound from that dopamine. So it feels really like, oh, you know, I want more. And that we've experienced that with everything. You experience it looking at your telephone and saying, oh, I don't want to look at that anymore. Watching Netflix and I don't want to look at that anymore. And you turn it off. It's like, oh, but I'm wondering what's happening to the next episode. You know, so we get sparked with that in every way, shape, and form these days. We're really dopaminergically overloaded in our society these days. What you have when people are really overloaded is that really teeter-tot of high, low. And what people will say, life is really boring and dull. And what happens is you end up with a dopamine deficit disorder because the sump pump comes out and it pulls out the normal, quote unquote, normal levels or functional levels of dopaminergic activity. It pulls it out. So you end up with this like deficit, which feels really, you know, people feel really anxious, really numb. They feel what we call anhedonia. They don't feel the feelings of like joy or good. I would say not even anxious. It's just the anhedonia becomes a thing. Everything becomes really blah and gray. And they've seen this with people with PTSD. So they've seen this with people coming back out of combat or coming back out of any extreme experience. People go into this ditch or hole. They, oh, you know, they're, and it's not a hole of relief. It's just like everything seems numb or everything seems like, you know what I mean? And we'll hear that of people even going through some grief processes. You see that in Ukraine right now. You see people's reactions and how they're responding to people. So what we're seeing specifically in our program is we've been looking specifically at folks with post-traumatic stress disorder, and it doesn't matter the type, whether it's childhood trauma or civilian trauma or combat trauma or military trauma. We're seeing that their reasons for gambling are the same, but stronger irrational cognition, stronger feelings that they can control this, stronger feelings that this will help them, stronger feelings across the board. So I think it's because of that dopamine deficit disorder. I think in part because they're so like dipped down that they when they're engaging in activities of gambling, that they feel a spark and they feel maybe, I don't know if this is the right terminology, but alive again, and sparked up again. And so that's what we've been looking at. And that's, you know, one of my goals is to create connection with people so that they can to help people feel alive or connected in a way that's socially or in align with their values, and align with their morals, and align with their codes, so they don't, like you said, Vin, sit there and go, oh my gosh, I've become a liar. I've become everything that's against the code for which I joined the military is what I'm seeing. So you have this, they have a code that they live by, and then they start acting outside of that code, and it becomes, it starts up becoming a battle within themselves. But at the same time, there's this really tremendous addiction that's pulling them, again, that dopamine pull, that dopamine motivation toward that high, because that high, Calgon, take me away, it takes things away. I've noticed there are some questions.
Yes, Phil, could you elaborate for us on the questions that were asked?
Yes, one of the questions that came in was if you came forward as an active military member with and tried to get help or admitted you had a gambling problem, is there a risk of a negative discharge?
So historically, it was very much a risk. These days, less so. So these days, what I've seen are, now I'm not seeing everybody, and I have heard of people being discharged before I meet them. There's just like media stories and so forth. The one thing that I do know, and we all know, that if there's some kind of illegal activity, despite it even being involved with gambling, there will be more of a movement toward discharge for that. It may be a medical discharge, but there will be more of a likelihood of discharge for that. I am getting more and more people as I've gone through my career, come and ask for services, ask for treatment from their command, and have been given that ability to do so. So generally, I would say it has improved pretty significantly. And I do know, though, one of the realities with having a gambling addiction is handling money. And if part of your position in the service has some kind of high risk category or has secret clearance or something like that, that's when it can get a little bit more tricky regarding the type of position that someone has. Again, I haven't seen a lot of that, but I have seen, and I've heard people talk about their concerns regarding that specifically. So I think it's improving. I think we have still more room for improvement. I think more and more people are more willing to talk about it. There's more and more trainings at the military bases, and also military base medical corps going and getting specific training related to this. One of the things, obviously, that is a concern in the military are the bases overseas that have the machines. There's over 3,000 gambling machines on bases, which basically funds the recreational activities for those bases. So that continues to be a concern, that there's these kind of government operated casinos on bases. And what are we really doing about those, and what do they really mean? And is this something that they really want to do? And really kind of thinking about that more thoroughly. It's been sort of hovering in the thinking zone, but I think we're getting closer to looking at it more clearly and looking at the potential risk that gives for our active duty military members. You have to remember, the active duty military members, the bulk of them are young men. And we know, being male and being young and having financial ability, that those are high risk. That's a high risk category. Just like we've seen in the college age students here. So young, male, having cash, don't have a lot of responsibilities for that cash, and have a casino right there, to go to. So those are some high risk issues. And so having those machines with quick access like that is a concern. we also know the issues with access and how that creates a problem.
How about the card playing component in the
Yeah.
military, Doctor? Could you elaborate on that as a trigger, as a real issue for these
Well,
young males?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of card playing. I would say that when we've talked to folks and interviewed folks that, you know, particularly on destroyers, there's not anything you can do when you're on a Navy destroyer and you're out. So playing cards is one of the things that people do. I have had heard people playing cards when they're in country for the Middle East conflicts as well. You know, during downtime, playing cards and feigning not gambling, but gambling, and having different ways of doing it, using like the little Tabasco bottles and a certain kind of stone or a bottle cap as a monetary value when they're playing. So again, I think anything, you know, the main thing is prevention and helping people understand, you know, the implications of this and what might happen. I've had many people join the service to get away from gambling, only to find on day one a lot of gambling. I've had people lose their paychecks, you know, the first day they're in a bunk with another, you know, with their bunkmate. They lose an entire paycheck very quickly, whether it's by lifting weights or playing darts or anything that you can gamble on. So again, I think it's awareness and prevention and having that conversation so people are aware of what's going on. As you know, this is very integrated in our society now. I cannot believe how things have changed even in the last 20 years. But as a kid, gambling, my childhood, I'm in my mid-50s, it's a totally different childhood than my kids' childhood and what's available out there for gambling, military or no, not military, regular old civilian.
Well, that's one of the questions I wanted to pose to you with the online gambling, in terms of the patients that you're seeing coming into your program, whether they be active duty or veterans. Has there been an uptick because of the widespread availability on our phones? Every kid's carrying a phone, and it's a casino and it's a bookie.
Right.
A bookie that takes bets, not someone that makes books.
Right. So, you know, it's interesting because I would say, you know, I'm at the highest level of care generally when you look at a national program, because I'm a national program. We do virtual national. We've historically had this like national residential program. We have a local program. What we see typically is some change in gambling in our world. So like when West Virginia increased their gambling so significantly all those years ago, it was some years after that we started to see referrals. Same with like Illinois, same with, you know, any of the other, we just actually got a sports betting referral from Pennsylvania. We don't get a lot. Now I think that's going to change because what happens is, you know, we talked about this in the beginning, people keep it a secret. It's pretty easy initially to keep it a secret, especially if you have some money coming in. You know, and if somebody has, you know, a military retirement or a military disability, the beginning of each month you have money coming in, so you can be flush again at the beginning of the month. So I would say I'm anticipating some changes there. I am not seeing them yet. By far, the biggest kind of gambling that we're seeing are slot machines, or the traditional slot machines, which have been, you know, demonstrated to be extremely addictive. I would say, you know, scratch offs, lottery, we get some, a good amount of them. And then we have a whole chunk of people that are strategic, have the strategic games and so forth. When they're taking the strategic games and they're putting them online, That's a different situation. When you're taking something like a sports betting situation where you have a bookie and so forth, and you have to do certain things or in order to keep going, and you change it to a platform that's online that makes it super simple. And that's some of the, I looked at some of the folks that are like creating the platforms for this. And one of the guys that was selling it was saying, we want to make it really simple. So Aunt Mabel will just go on there and make a bet. And she really doesn't have to know the over under. She just goes on because she likes that team with the orange and the black stripe. And so it's that kind of thing that is going to change things around. And we don't know the implications of that yet. We do know the implications. There's a study from years ago at the Cleveland VA with Bob Breen and Norm Krudelbach that looked at machine gambling versus strategic gambling. And the strategic gambling trajectory from beginning of problematic gambling to getting a problem was about 7 years. Machine gambling was somewhere around 2 years. A year and a half or 2 years. So it's telescoped, it's much faster. So when you take these strategic games and put them on a platform that's faster, that has algorithms, that has lights and like has color, it's all very stimulating. So that's all very hijacking, and it's going to change. It's going to change the way this looks in the future. So we don't have any data to say how this is going to impact people, except that we know smartphones are incredibly addicting. We know that. We know that if we put an app for Candy Crush on here, that's extremely addicting, or for anything on here, except for the in and out apps. I mean, people aren't spending lots and lots of time on Google Maps because it's, you go in, you figure out your thing and you're out. But Instagram and Facebook and like the little games that people play, all of that, they're not in and out apps. Those are things that are designed to pull you in. So if you put gambling on something that's designed to pull you in and keep you pulled in, they've got all this data on how to do it. That's where I think we're gonna see something very different. I don't know this, but that's my hypothesis based on the other data that we have from machine gambling.
Phil, there's another question there from Mr. Larson.
Yes, there is. And there were a couple questions came in, but what Thomas Larson asked, I wrote it down, and I'm getting Luis's too. So I'll go with the one that's in front of me. But what's an effective prevention tool for parents to utilize if their son or daughter is actively serving and they have knowledge that their loved one is gambling?
Yeah. Okay. So someone that's involved in the military right now, obviously we know that it's very difficult to change someone that doesn't want to be changed. I do know that the more people are engaged in other activities and other things that are, it actually creates flexibility in the brain. Even doing things like going outside, this sounds like so like, how could this make a difference to my brain? Going outside and looking at a horizon can reset the brain. So one of the things that they're finding that I think is most disturbing is when people are on devices like this, what it does to the brain is it tunnel visions people, and it makes people having a hard time problem solving. The smaller your screen, the worse. So when I think about that and what that means for gambling, when people are gambling at a screen, I think, gambling is a hyperstimulus. It pulls somebody in. They become more and more pulled in to that moment. So if somebody's like long distance, actively serving, in school, there's lots of actually school programs for veterans, and they're seeing an uptick there of some gambling, but also gaming. And I think it's creating, as much as you can, create programming for people to get together in other ways and other forms. To do the things that we used to do is go outside and play soccer, but I think it's getting people to practice that outside, practice things. So the things that can be very helpful to stopping gambling, if people want to, is the self-binding techniques, which is creating any kind of distance between the desire to gamble and gambling. So it could be money management, it could be, driving in a different direction, it could be taking the apps off, it could be banning from the casino, which I know a lot of people have a hard time with, and I don't think that's something to jump into if people aren't ready for. But it's also doing things that are sort of health preservative, including, and people will not like to hear this, eating right, like sugar, really bad diets filled with things that are kind of processed foods makes us more hijackable. It makes for a more depression, more anxiety. It just makes us more hijackable for something like getting sucked into any kind of process addiction, including gambling. If the other thing, obviously, it's something that Vin had talked about earlier, is sort of what do you do when a loved one is doing this? And it's kind of related to, kind of bailing out and giving people money. I've heard multiple things. I've heard some people say, if my family didn't give me money, I'd be dead right now. Like when I look at people that are in GA. So that I don't think it's really so easy to cut and dry it, but I do think it's important for people to know, to have good boundaries, and to know that sometimes when they keep giving someone money in a bailout, I'm not thrilled with that word, but I'll use it anyways, a bailout, that it can create more harm than good. I also think helping people, it really starts earlier than the service. I think helping our young people, I think we're in the midst of something that we didn't know how powerful it was going to be, particularly with the changes. I think helping people grow in their, to have multiple ways of having joy in life, I think is really important. I love it when I hear the guys in Gamblers Anonymous, go golfing on Derby Day, or have some kind of other event, a picnic or whatever during the Super Bowl to again connect, so that you're less likely to engage in those issues.
Well, we're just about out of time, and I think it's most appropriate again to just thank you, Dr. Chapman, for your insight and for your dedication to helping problem gamblers. The motivation of your mom being a nurse and working there at the VA, and dad being a Korean veteran. Obviously, you come from good people that were giving and serving, and obviously you're continuing that. And it's just such a pleasure for us. And I'm grateful to you on behalf of the New Jersey Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I very much appreciate it. It's quite the honor.
Dr. Chapman, from this end too, thank you very much. And Vin, great job, as we knew you would do here in our second webinar in Problem Gambling Awareness Month here at 800 Gambler. And if you or someone you know has a gambling problem or may need help, please get in contact with us for some hope, support, and direction to treatment. We really want to be of aid if we can be. And we thank you all for watching the webinar, and just an extra thanks once again to Dr. Chapman And our next webinar will be on March the 25th, when we'll look at sports betting, specifically in New Jersey, since it went legal in 2018. So thank you all again and have a tremendous weekend.